here. Before, though, I get any further, I really want to acknowledge a number of people, a lot of the great colleagues that I've had the privilege of working with over the years. So Fadil Mata, Joanna Lin, Harshad Puranik, Sean McLean, Yongun Lee, and Soin Yoon. Everything that I'm going to talk about today, especially at the back half, once I get to a lot of operational and logistical issues, we did not start doing the studies in that way. We're on sort of the fifth or sixth wave of what I consider to be the way that we run experience sampling studies. And so all the people listed on this slide contributed in a material way to the way in which we do these. And so it's only appropriate that I acknowledge their contributions. Okay, so today we're going to start off with a few conceptual issues, and then the back half, we're going to move to some operational and logistical issues with running ESM. Back half's going to get a little crazy, so hang on, you'll see what I mean. Those who have run ESM studies with me now know what's coming. So to begin, conceptual issues. I want to begin with why is now a good time to learn about experience sampling. So I stole this slide from Ali Gabriel. This is from publication Podzakov et al. 2019. And so this is actually really outdated data, right? And that's what you need to know. So even then, it was so clear that experience sampling and studies using experience sampling were on the rise, and that it was just an increasingly popular methodology. And so I think this data stopped in 2017. So frankly, we're like 6 years later. It's probably about time to update this slide, right? That slope is probably even steeper as of now. So, well, sorry, and there's one other thing I should say on this slide. Even if you are not yourself going to do an experience sampling study, what this slide shows is that you may end up as a reviewer of experience sampling studies, or you may need to read experience sampling studies in your own research, or even if you are macro and you would not do an experience sampling study, you may have colleagues or be evaluating people for tenure and things like this who themselves are doing. So it is really, really good to have at least some basic understanding of what goes into these studies so that you can interpret them on your own. So for the most part, when I talk about this, I'm just going to say ESM, or experience sampling methodology. That's the preferred term at this point. Depending on how far back you go in your reading, or if you go into some other literatures that tend to use this methodology, you might see things like ecological momentary assessment, everyday experience sampling, event sampling, daily diary, pulse surveys is what practice calls them. There are like some semantic differences between these terms. They're not explicitly interchangeable, but for our purposes, it's close enough. And so ESM, experience sampling, is kind of the agreed upon term at this point. So key features, what makes a study ESM, or experience sampling? So we have to begin, we have multiple measures of the same construct over some period of time. What this does, it allows us to examine within individual variation in our phenomenon of interest. We care about the variance that is within persons. How do people differ based on themselves and not between person? What are the implications of people being different from each other? That is a necessary but not sufficient condition to call something experience sampling, because as we often get told by reviewers when we submit papers, well, longitudinal latent change analyses also make use of repeated measures. And so then we get this question, which is, we have all this rich data. Why would we waste it doing experience sampling? Why wouldn't we have done longitudinal or latent change analyses? What's frustrating is that comment is usually also accompanied by a rejection. And so I never get a chance to actually answer the question. Turns out there's a very, very good answer to that question. Those methods presume change. It's literally in the name, right? So longitudinal latent change analyses are presuming that the person who started the study is different than the person who ended the study. ESM does not. We presume fluctuation, but no change. You have to be the same person at the beginning, the middle, and the end. That doesn't mean that you don't feel one way or act one way on Monday versus Tuesday versus Wednesday, but you've always got this sort of stable anchor around which you fluctuate, but there's that inherent stability there. So that is the difference. This is why we are just analyzing this within individuals, looking at sort of a basic ESM methodology and not these change things, because it's fundamentally different phenomena and different research questions. So when we're doing experience sampling, we are focused on transient phenomena. What we're interested in is how some transient state, experience, or behavior impacts some subsequent state, experience, or behavior. We want to capture occurrences as closely as possible to when they would naturally occur. So we're looking for more concrete or immediate things, not more abstract or recalled experiences. I have to point out, those words, as closely as possible, are doing a lot of work in that bullet point. There's always some recall. If you were literally in the middle of an argument with your spouse and you said, hold on, I have to do a survey about this, I suspect the argument is going to continue and it might change. We were arguing about one thing, now we're arguing about something else. It's like you're asking this question, like, was someone rude to you today? Like, let me tell you. Okay, so there's always going to be some recall. You're asking about since the previous survey, today, last night, maybe over the past weekend, maybe over the past week. Once we start getting to a month, we're straining the idea of sort of our experience. I'll talk a little bit more about over the past week. I'm open to this as a kind of an experience sampling thing. Super briefly on within individual covariation. So the idea is that I report a level of 2 for my positive affect PA today and a 4 tomorrow. So the research question might be, do people with higher levels of positive affect on a given day enact more OCBs on those days compared to days with lower? That is in contrast with between individual covariation, which would be looking at the level of OCBs enacted by a person who's higher on PA compared to a person who is lower on PA. This is a point that's important. I don't want to overstate this too much, but it is an important point. Many of our theories are actually inherently within individual if you do a strict reading of them. And I direct you to Beal 2015 and Gabriel all 2019 for longer discussions of this point. But very briefly, look at something like the job demands resources model. This is a theory about how the experience of some environmental stressors mobilize various physiological and psychological processes when they are experienced. So the implication is that if they're not experienced, then those processes are not mobilized. That's within individual, okay? Now, it does not preclude tests of this theory at the between individual level. Probably most tests of this theory have been at the between individual level. The same would go for conservation of resources, social exchange, all these theories. It's the hallmark of a good theory when the processes sort of make sense across levels of analysis. So it's not saying there's anything wrong with it, but the point is that our theories also work really, really well within an individual also. And so it's just deeper tests of the theories by looking at them from this lens. And then often I was talking to Larry about this too. One nice thing with experience sampling, I'll talk about more because we get closer to the phenomena. So sometimes you can get maybe more precise tests of the theory, or you can get more at some of the things that the theory says is going on in terms of the processes. It's easier to get to some of the cognition, the affect, things like this, because you can actually get closer to when it is happening. It's harder to talk about affect and depletion over longer periods of time, but over the last couple of hours, you can get better measures of those. Okay, so what questions should you, so by this point I've convinced you, yep, sure, sounds great, let's think about doing an experience sampling study, but we need to start asking some questions about the phenomena, but even more importantly, should I run an ESM study? The answer is maybe not. That doesn't mean you shouldn't learn about it. I hope you don't leave the presentation today. But that doesn't inherently mean you should go do one. These studies are not easy. They are not a magic publishing bullet. This is was my first semester at Texas A&M University. I had a senior faculty member say to me, "Aren't these studies dead? Everyone I talk to says they hate reviewing them." I'm still here, so I can confirm those studies were not dead, as it turns out, but it doesn't mean it's been an easy road for sure. Had a doctoral student at Texas A&M who got a comment from reviewers. Authors did not adequately justify their use of an ESM study on a phenomenon about dynamic fluctuation in behavior in subsequent states. I don't know what you would do except for testing an ESM study, but faculty member was not wrong in that reviewers kind of hate these studies. Okay. You do get reviewer microaggressions. We had a really cool ESM on a really cool phenomenon called a pilot study, and we were then told to go collect what was obviously much better between individual data. And it's like, okay, sure. We showed the same thing 3 more times, right? Anyway, so point being, given all of that, why would you run an experience sampling study now that I've gotten you sufficiently scared about this? They're cool. You get a lot of really good out of them, both theoretically and empirically. One of the big benefits is you get reduction of memory biases, okay? Because the measurement of what you're looking at is just much closer to the phenomenon. It's not a week ago or a month ago or in general. It's like over the past 4 hours. People don't live their lives in general or over the past month or how many times over the past year. We live our lives day to day, and that's what's super salient to us. And so the closer that you can get to that happening is just you're getting a much more precise, better reflection, just better capturing the phenomenon. You might be capturing a phenomenon that you just would not otherwise be able to capture. You have a reduction of method biases also, which is a really, really good point. By looking at things within individuals, we eliminate stable biases. Often one of the things that we're concerned with from a common method variance standpoint are things like leniency, social desirability, the experiences I've had as a person influence the way that I view the world and all of this. We strip all of that out when we go within individuals. All the stable stuff falls away because even though I have certain world experiences and life experiences and I live in a particular place and all of this, I still change, fluctuate day to day. And so all the stable stuff goes away and we can just look at those fluctuations. I like to say we get to the pure psychology of what's happening without a lot of the other stable kinds of things. Again, check Gabriel et al. 2019 for that. Another benefit is it's a little bit easier to separate some measurements across time. That is a good way. There are common method variance things that we do need to be at least somewhat concerned about. I'll come back to that point here as well. More questions to ask yourself. Is your phenomenon appropriate for doing this? So you've got to be able to say that people who experience higher or lower levels of an event, state, behavior on a given day are then likely to engage in, experience, feel, whatever, higher or lower levels of some subsequent state, attitude, behavior, whatever. And so if the phenomenon is not likely to vary, to fluctuate over the time that you're looking at it, then this is not going to be a good methodology. So we can think about like helping coworkers versus socializing newcomers. From the standpoint of helping, yeah, we've pretty much shown that various behaviors like helping have a lot of day-to-day fluctuations. That's a really good candidate for an ESM study. Something like socializing newcomers, often what we're focused on are role adjustment type behaviors, changes in role ambiguity and all of this. And so that could be good from an experience sampling standpoint, but I don't know if you're going to see those changes in role ambiguity day to day. Maybe that's a little better candidate for more of a weekly experience sampling study. Maybe also things like much lower base rate behaviors, enacted deviance, abusive supervision, things like this. You can look at these things day to day and people it's just your base rates are just really, really low. And it's easier for me to think about looking at negative experiences, negative behaviors over that longer time frame. Bad is stronger than good. They're more salient. And so there's a little bit more recall, but I'm more willing to accept that these experiences, these behaviors are still pretty salient in the person's mind. They remember it happening, they relive it, they can tell us how they felt as a result.